The reception hall of the Korthak flagship Bone Render had all the charm of a military funeral attended by tax collectors. Ambassador Kei Nakamura stepped through the airlock, noting how the artificial gravity immediately tried to crush her into the deck plating, a petty intimidation tactic that worked wonders on species with delicate skeletal structures. Unfortunately for her hosts, humans had evolved carrying their own weight around a gravity well that treated most galactic civilizations like poorly constructed origami. "Ah, the Earth representative arrives," rumbled Warlord Vexthuren from his ceremonial throne, which appeared to be constructed from the fossilized remains of something that had died badly. "I was beginning to wonder if your species had forgotten how to navigate between star systems." The assembled delegates offered various sounds of amusement. The Zilithian Trade Consortium hissed through their breathing apparatus, their version of polite laughter. 3 cluster entities vibrated in harmonic synchronization, creating that peculiar buzzing noise that meant they found something collectively entertaining. Even the luminal energy being flickered in what passed for mirth among sentient plasma clouds. "Traffic was murder," Kay replied, settling into the absurdly small chair provided for her. "Another calculated slight. Though I suppose that's redundant on a ship called Bone Render." Vexthuran's mandibles clicked together in what might have been appreciation for wit, or the sound a particularly large insect makes before devouring prey. With Korthaks, the distinction was often academic. "Your species has such delightful euphemisms for violence," observed Chief Trade Coordinator Zil Nethys, her crystalline form casting prismatic shadows across the conference table. "It suggests a certain innocence about the realities of galactic commerce. Commerce being war by other means." Kay adjusted her position in the miniature furniture. "How refreshingly honest." The cluster entities buzzed again, this time with what sounded like genuine surprise. Collective consciousness had many advantages, but subtle irony apparently wasn't among them. "The human makes jokes while sitting in children's furniture," Vexthuran observed, gesturing with one massive claw toward Kay's accommodations. "Your people truly are the galaxy's most entertaining pets. Do you also perform tricks?" "Only when the audience can appreciate them," Kay replied, making notes on her tablet with the focused attention of someone cataloging specimens, which, in a sense, she was. Dr. Keiko Nakamura held 3 degrees in xenoanthropology and a security clearance that would have given most government officials nosebleeds. Her official title, Cultural Liaison for Interspecies Development, was bureaucratic poetry that meant absolutely nothing and everything simultaneously. What she actually did was study power structures, social hierarchies, and the fascinating ways different species convinced themselves they were apex predators. "The territorial dispute regarding the Helios Junction requires resolution," announced the luminal delegate, its voice crackling through electromagnetic frequency converters. "The Korthak expansion threatens established trade routes." "Threatens?" Vexthuran rose from his throne, all 4 meters of armored muscle and barely contained aggression. "We are claiming what was already ours by right of superior force. If your cargo vessels cannot defend themselves, perhaps they deserve different ownership." The Zilithian representative's breathing apparatus whistled sharply. "The junction has been neutral space for 3 centuries. Neutrality is a luxury maintained by those capable of enforcing it," Vexthuran replied. "The Korthak Empire recognizes no authority save strength." Kay continued taking notes, observing how each species reacted to direct confrontation. The cluster entity's harmonic frequency shifted toward discord. Stress response. The luminal delegate's energy pattern fluctuated. anxiety or anger, difficult to distinguish. The Zilithians' crystalline bodies darkened, preparing for conflict or withdrawal. "And what does Earth's representative think of this philosophical position?" Vex Thuran asked, his attention settling on Kay with the weight of a collapsing star. "Does your species have opinions on matters of territorial sovereignty?" "We have some experience with the concept," Kay replied without looking up from her tablet, "though our approach tends toward the indirect." "Indirect," Vex Thuran repeated, tasting the word like something unpleasant. "Yes, I suppose when one lacks the physical capability for direct action, subterfuge becomes necessary. How very human." The other delegates made their various sounds of agreement. In a galaxy where might had always made right, humanity's reputation for cunning over strength was well established. What none of them seemed to grasp was that the two weren't mutually exclusive. 3 hours of circular negotiation had accomplished nothing except proving that diplomatic deadlock was the one universal constant across all sentient species. Vex Thuran's patience, never particularly robust to begin with, had worn thinner than atmospheric pressure on a dying moon. "This discussion grows tiresome," he announced, slamming one armored fist against his throne's armrest hard enough to crack the fossilized bone. "Perhaps we need a more practical demonstration of hierarchy." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, or maybe that was just everyone's blood pressure. "A combat assessment." Zilnethys' prismatic form brightened with anticipation. "How wonderfully archaic." "The Korthak traditional method for establishing authority when words prove insufficient," Vex Thuran explained, though his gaze had already fixed on the smallest being in the room. "Single combat until one participant yields or becomes incapable of continuing." The cluster entity's harmonics shifted into excited chatter among themselves. Energy beings, it turned out, found violence as entertaining as anyone else. They just had fewer opportunities to participate directly. "Combat trials are recognized under Section 12 of the Galactic Mediation Protocols," noted the luminal delegate with bureaucratic precision. "All parties must consent, and the victor's position takes precedence in subsequent negotiations." Kay looked up from her tablet for the first time in 20 minutes. "Which participant did you have in mind?" Vex Thuran's mandibles spread in what passed for a grin among his species. "The weakest link determines the strength of any alliance. I challenge Earth's representative to prove her species deserves consideration in matters of galactic importance." "How sporting of you," Kay replied, setting her tablet aside and standing. "I accept." The silence that followed could have been weaponized and sold to terrorist organizations. "You accept?" Zilnethys' crystalline surface flickered with confusion. "Combat with a Korthak warlord?" "Well, not." Kay began removing her diplomatic jacket, revealing a simple black bodysuit underneath. "I've studied Korthak combat traditions extensively, fascinating blend of ritual aggression and practical violence, though I suspect most of your opponents don't typically volunteer." Vex Thuran's confidence faltered for exactly half a second before reasserting itself with compound interest. "Your bravery is admirable, even if misguided. I will make your defeat swift." "Generous," Kay replied, beginning a series of stretching exercises that looked suspiciously like warm-up routines. "Should we establish parameters? First blood, unconsciousness, or surrender?" "Surrender will suffice," Vex Thuran rumbled, clearly expecting this to be academic. "I have no desire to damage Earth's pet permanently." The other delegates had begun placing bets using various forms of energy currency. The cluster entities were giving odds of 30 to 1 against the human lasting more than 60 seconds. Even the luminal delegate, supposedly above such crude displays, had wagered a small solar flare's worth of plasma on the match ending before 2 minutes elapsed. "Before we begin," Kay said, rolling her shoulders with the casual precision of someone working out minor kinks, "I should mention that humans have been participating in combat sports for approximately 4,000 years. We've gotten rather good at it. 4,000 years of fighting each other over scraps," Vex Thuran corrected. "The Korthak Empire has been conquering star systems for longer than your species has possessed written language." "Different skill sets," Kay agreed pleasantly, "though I'd argue that fighting your own species requires more creativity. When everyone shares the same biological advantages and disadvantages, victory becomes a matter of technique, strategy, and pure stubborn refusal to quit." She rolled her neck, producing a series of small pops that somehow sounded ominous in the quiet room. "The Korthak advantage," she continued conversationally, "is obvious. Size, strength, natural armor, redundant organ systems. Your disadvantages are less apparent but equally significant. High center of gravity, limited flexibility, overconfidence based on previous opponents who were intimidated by your reputation." Vex Thuran's amusement curdled into something approaching concern. "You speak as if you've fought my kind before." "Not personally," Kay replied, settling into a fighting stance that looked borrowed from half a dozen different martial traditions. "But I've studied every recorded Kothate combat engagement for the past century. Academic interest, you understand." The warlord's mandibles clicked rapidly, either nervous laughter or the sound a predator makes when realizing it might have misjudged its prey. What happened next would be discussed in academic circles for decades, assuming any of the witnesses survived long enough to publish papers. Vex Thuran opened with a classic Korthak intimidation display, rising to his full, imposing height, spreading his secondary arms wide, and releasing a war cry that had historically caused enemy formations to break ranks and flee. The sound reverberated through the ship's hull like a weapon designed to liquefy courage. Kay waited for him to finish, then said, "Bless you." The warlord's charge began with all the subtlety of a collapsing building. 4 meters of armored death, moving with surprising speed, claws extended, mandibles spread for a killing bite. Standard Korthak doctrine called for overwhelming force applied immediately, end fights before opponents could adapt or exploit weaknesses. Kay moved sideways. Not a dodge, exactly. More like she had suddenly decided to occupy a different section of space-time. Vex Thuran's momentum carried him past her position, his claws raking empty air where a human should have been standing. "Interesting opening," Kay commented, now somehow behind him. "Very traditional. I particularly admire the commitment to linear thinking." The warlord spun with admirable speed for something his size, sweeping one massive arm in a horizontal arc designed to catch anything within a 3-meter radius. Basic physics suggested this should work. Physics, however, had apparently not consulted with human flexibility training. Kay bent backward at an angle that made several delegates wince in sympathetic pain, the armored limb passing centimeters above her face. As she came back upright, her elbow found a gap in Vex Thuran's natural armor with surgical precision. The sound the warlord made was not one typically associated with apex predators. "Your carapace has 17 vulnerable junction points," Kay observed conversationally, dancing away from his retaliatory swipe. "Evolutionary trade-offs. Excellent protection against most attacks, but those gaps are necessary for mobility. Fascinating design compromise." Vex Thuran's fighting style devolved rapidly from textbook technique to increasingly desperate flailing. Each attack missed by margins that seemed impossible until you realized his opponent was reading his movements like technical manuals. The shoulder joint there, Kei continued, landing another precise strike that sent electric pain through the warlord's nervous system. Minimal armor coverage because your species evolved from ambush predators. You needed full range of motion for grappling prey. The other delegates had gone completely silent. The cluster entity's harmonic buzzing had stopped entirely, a phenomenon previously thought impossible. Even the luminal being had dimmed to barely visible levels, either from shock or professional respect. "This should not be possible," whispered Zilnethis, her crystalline form flickering between colors like a malfunctioning light display. Vex Thuran attempted a final, desperate gambit, dropping his full weight toward the tiny human in a move that would have crushed most opponents into paste. Kei stepped aside, caught his descending arm, and used the warlord's own momentum to send him crashing into the conference table with enough force to reduce expensive furniture to expensive splinters. The mighty conqueror of star systems lay among the wreckage, breathing heavily and staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone whose worldview had just undergone rapid and traumatic revision. "I yield," he gasped. "Please, I yield." The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, then crossed into the realm of actively disturbing. "You studied us," Vex Thuran managed, struggling to sit upright among the debris. "How long have you been studying us?" "Professionally? About 15 years, Kei replied, brushing dust from her bodysuit. "Though humans have been observing galactic military doctrine since first contact, academic curiosity, mostly." "Academic curiosity," the warlord repeated flatly. "Your species broadcasts training exercises on public frequencies," Kei explained. "Very educational. The Zilithian combat philosophies are particularly interesting, all about crystalline resonance disruption. The cluster entities use fascinating swarm coordination patterns. Even the luminals have some impressive electromagnetic pulse techniques." The delegates exchanged glances that managed to convey universal concern across vastly different sensory systems. "You've been watching, all of us," Zilnethis stated, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested dawning horror. "Watching, learning, taking notes," Kei confirmed cheerfully. "It's remarkable how much you can discover about a species by observing how they fight. Combat reveals character, strategy, biological limitations, psychological triggers, very comprehensive data sets." She retrieved her tablet from where she had set it aside, checking her notes with the satisfied air of someone whose research had just received practical confirmation. "Of course, studying martial techniques is only part of proper xenoanthropological research," she added almost casually. "Cultural analysis requires broader observation." The room's atmosphere had shifted from diplomatic tension to something approaching existential dread. Even the recycled air seemed heavier, as if the ship's life support systems were struggling to process the implications of what they had just witnessed. "Broader observation," echoed the luminal delegate, its electromagnetic field pulsing with patterns that suggested deep unease. "Define the scope of this academic interest." They scrolled through her tablet, apparently looking for the appropriate file. "Well, there's the standard sociological framework analysis, power structures, resource allocation methods, decision-making hierarchies. Then we have the psychological profiles of leadership classes, behavioral pattern mapping for different stress scenarios, and comprehensive assessments of each species' strategic blind spots." Vex Thuran managed to pull himself upright, though he remained seated among the wreckage of what had once been diplomatic furniture. "Strategic blind spots?" "Every species has them," Kei replied, with the tone of someone discussing weather patterns. "The Korthax, for instance, consistently underestimate opponents who don't fit their physical dominance paradigm. Zilithians assume their technological superiority translates to tactical invincibility. Cluster entities believe collective consciousness makes them unpredictable, when actually it makes them extremely predictable once you understand their consensus-building algorithms. She paused, glancing at the luminal representative. Energy beings think their non-corporeal nature provides immunity to conventional strategies, but electromagnetic coherence requires specific environmental conditions that can be influenced. The silence that followed was profound enough to qualify as a natural phenomenon. "How many of you are there?" whispered Zilnethys, her crystalline form now cycling through colors that corresponded to deep alarm in her species' emotional spectrum. "Oh, that's the beautiful part," Kay said, settling back into her ridiculously small chair as if nothing had happened. "We're everywhere. Cultural attachés, trade representatives, diplomatic observers, academic exchange participants, tourism coordinators. Every human you've encountered in a harmless capacity for the past 40 years has been collecting data." The cluster entities finally broke their collective silence, their harmonic frequencies building to something approaching panic. "The trade negotiations on Xerion Prime. Dr. Chen was mapping your resource extraction methodologies and analyzing vulnerability points in your supply chains. The cultural exposition on Zilithian Prime. Professor Williams documented your military training protocols and weapon manufacturing processes. The scientific collaboration at the Galactic Observatory. Dr. Okafor studied your sensor networks and communication systems, while contributing to your research on stellar cartography. Each revelation hit the assembled delegates like physical blows. Species that had ruled sectors of the galaxy for millennia were discovering they had been dissected, catalogued, and filed away by beings they had dismissed as irrelevant curiosities. "The peace treaty negotiations," Vexthoran said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of dawning comprehension. "The mediation sessions, the cultural exchange programs." "Every single one," Kay confirmed. 43 years of comprehensive intelligence gathering disguised as humanity's eager participation in galactic civilization. We've documented military capabilities, economic systems, political structures, technological limitations, psychological manipulation techniques, and social control mechanisms for every major species in this sector. The warlord's mandibles twitched spasmodically. "You've been planning conquest." "Conquest?" Kay laughed, the sound somehow more unsettling than Vexthoran's earlier war cry. "Who said anything about conquest? We're anthropologists, not imperialists. Though I suppose the distinction might seem academic from your perspective." She stood, straightening her diplomatic jacket with meticulous care. The galaxy spent decades debating whether humanity deserved recognition as a legitimate civilization. Meanwhile, we've been documenting exactly how this civilization functions, who makes the real decisions, where the actual power lies, and what it would take to either preserve or reshape the existing order if circumstances required such action. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for every species present simultaneously. The humans hadn't been seeking acceptance or recognition. They had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history, using their own perceived irrelevance as perfect camouflage. "The question was never whether we belonged at your table," Kay concluded, collecting her notes with professional satisfaction. "We've been studying the table, the room, the building, and everyone who thinks they own the place. Now, shall we resume our discussion about territorial sovereignty? I believe you'll find our perspective on the matter has become considerably more informed." Outside the flagship's viewports, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the fact that the galaxy's newest players had just revealed they had been several moves ahead all along.